They say it began not with a trial, nor a confession, nor even a scream, but with a whisper. A fading voice crackling like dry parchment against a cold hearth, spoken by a woman named Isabeau. And Isabeau's voice breaks one final time. She took the baby before he breathed, then nothing. Silence. A morning bell tolls once outside. And so begins the first ripple, barely noticed. A woman dying of old age and loss, muttering of someone who never existed. But she is locked away in the cellar beneath the church, where the stones sweat and rats pray in silence. She sings to herself, old songs, lullabies in Occitan, and they say her voice is how the devil hums in the dark. The priest keeps records in a leather-bound book, but not in ink, only ash and spit, as if fear itself can be written. When the children fall sick from moldy bread, and one infant dies in the cradle, no one looks to the miller or the mold. They only remember that Marinette once touched the child's feet. You do not need logic when you have death in a name, or so they believe. But the villagers are hungry for blame, drunk on the ghosts of poor harvests and poorer souls. Her mouth is stuffed with a cloth soaked in vinegar and ashes to keep her from speaking curses. But in the shadows behind shutters, and in the woods beyond the fields, women gather herbs in silence, and old crones whisper prayers that are not Latin. The smoke from Marinette's pyre clings to the air for days, sweet and foul, like burnt rosemary and bone. No one speaks of her again, but they all remember how the fire smelled. And somewhere, deep in the belly of the land, something shifts, something ancient and hungry. The fire was only the beginning, but her eyes burn hotter than the flames ever will. You see, one of the younger women avert her gaze, clutching her own belly, knowing she once begged Marinette for herbs to end a secret shame. The men do not speak of what they know. Fire does not scream, but the crowd does. And when it is over, they go home quieter, heavier, as if something had been set free rather than extinguished. Her neighbor, an unmarried midwife named Marinette, becomes the name whispered around fires. She does not attend mass. She bleeds frogs for medicine. She walks to Isley, between the dead and the born. No one needs evidence when the night is long and the children are weak. You are standing at her bedside in the village of La Motte in southern France, sometime after the famine, but before the Great Plague. The priest, who once asked her for poultices for his gout, now averts his eyes. They question her about herbs and shadows, about wolves howling on the night of the miscarriage. Now she answers calmly, without fear. That is her first mistake. No tears, no trembling. They expect witches to cackle or sob, never to speak plainly. You hear the murmur spread. She does not fear death because she serves it, and the syndic finds a small charm made of twigs and cloth in her home, a poppet made for a mother who had lost 3 children. He raises it above his head as if it were Lucifer's own sigil. That is all it takes. Her face is pale parchment drawn tight over bone, her eyes full of the mist that settles in the low valleys come winter. Her fingers are clutching a rosary worn to wood. Her lips tremble as she speaks the words. She walks in the wind with blood on her apron. ... The shadow midwife. You feel the room darken, not from the dying fire, but from something older. The priest leans closer, more out of habit than belief. You watch as Marinette is summoned by the village syndic. They do not torture her, not yet. No chains, not in this first trial. First pyre is built on a hill above La Motte. The logs are still green. They crackle and spit, reluctant to burn. Her hands are tied. Later, when the priest walks through the village and speaks of purification and God's wrath, they nod. They are safe now. The wind carries your steps to the Bavarian town of Altenburg, where the stones are blackened with stories, and the fields breathe with superstition. Here, nestled behind an ivy-choked wall, lives a woman known as Lean, a healer, they say, though never loudly. Where you and Belladonna coil beside Comfrey and Henbane, the air rich with the perfume of both healing and death. They remember only the smell of crushed leaves, the murmur of incantations they never understood, and the look in Leanne's eyes when she was told she would not be paid. A rat-bitten cradle, a moldy blanket, it does not matter. The boy is cold, and the healer still breathes. That is unacceptable. No defense, only fear. The inquisitor reads her sins aloud, planting unholy seeds, speaking to animals, stealing breath from the unborn. The sky is soft gray, like wet wool. Her plants have already been burned in her garden. At night, women leave small bundles of thyme there. When the wind blows through Altenburg, it carries the scent of burnt leaves and regret. All that remains is a scorched patch of earth and the smell of lavender turned to ash. As the flames rise, she does not scream. Some say that is because she has no soul. Others say it is because she no longer needs one. The crowd watches, not with glee, but with silence, as if trying to convince themselves they are safer now, that sickness and death will not come again. But the air is still heavy, and the children still cough. When she laughs, it is quiet and bitter. She tells them she has done only what their own wives begged her to do, that her garden was grown with their tears, not curses, but no one listens. Truth has no weight here, only fire does. They tie her hands with nettle rope and gag her with cloth soaked in holy water. The bishop makes the sign of the cross without looking at her. Confession is extracted not with blades, but with silence, with thirst, with sleeplessness, with chanting. They make her sit beneath a dripping stone, each drop counting the hours of her guilt. When she cries out, they take it as proof. When she falls silent, they take it as proof. When she begins to mumble plant names in her fever, they believe she is calling demons by their roots. That look sharp as cold iron is all the proof the town needs. A search of her home turns up jars of roots and bones, dried frog skins, a small ledger of names and treatments, a record of mercy mistaken for malice. The baron's steward finds a bundle of twigs tied with red thread beneath the bed. It is likely a charm for safe sleep, but he lifts it like a severed hand, and the crowd recoils. Her neighbors whisper that she speaks to her plants, that she buries bones beneath the mandrake roots to make them scream with truth. But still, they come to her. At dusk, with scarves over their faces, begging for teas to stop bleeding, poultices to shrink tumors, salves to ease childbirth. They come in secrecy and leave in shame. Until the day the baron's wife loses her unborn child, and a servant remembers seeing Lean's blue-stained apron in the castle courtyard. You see her tend to the bruised and the bleeding with finger-stained green from herbs and roots. Her touch is firm, her eyes sharp, and her tongue sharper still. The bishop sends for a traveling inquisitor, a man whose robes smell of candle smoke and horse sweat, whose eyes never blink fully. He interviews Lean while she is bound in iron, her wrists already bruised, her mouth dry from days without water. She denies nothing. She explains everything. The roots, the teas, the salves. She tells them the plants' names in Latin and in the old tongue. That is her second mistake. The devil speaks many languages, they say, Latin among them. The inquisitor does not write her words down. He only asks if she has dreamt of wolves. She knows how to draw fever from the brow and silence from the restless. And that is why she is feared. It's not because she causes illness, but because she dares to understand it. In this land, knowledge is not a gift, it is a mark. Lean's garden is a riot of strange life. No one questions how a miscarriage might occur after 3 stillbirths. They do not burn her yet. First, they must be sure. On the 3rd night, the steward's infant son coughs blood and dies. The trial is held in the town square. There are no jurors, only witnesses. You are there when they bring her to the stake. When the ashes settle, they build a small shrine in her name, but not openly. A cross carved in bark, a few wildflowers. The river near Tillingham is slow and brown, curled like a dying serpent between bramble-choked banks. It has seen frost, famine, and funeral barges, but none of it has moved the water like what you are about to witness. And her hands tremble with the memory of her own sister, burned for the same. Her wrists are bound in linen that smells of mold and incense. They draw a crude cross on her forehead with river mud. A boy steps forward, barely older than she, and claims she looked at him with wolf's eyes during Mass. They decide she will be confined and watched, her every movement recorded in the parish log. But 3 nights later, the steward's baby falls ill. A rash, a fever, no breath. The priest blames the humors, but the mother blames Alice. And that is enough. You are there when they return to the river, this time without ceremony. Her body is found days later, tangled in reeds, her fingers still clutching a scrap of birch bark shaped like a dove. Another says he saw her walking in the storm and smiling. These are the testimonies. These are the building blocks of her fate. The boy who accused her loses his voice and never sings again. And every spring, the birds seem to vanish a week early. The ordeal of water was meant to reveal guilt or innocence. But all it revealed was how quickly mercy drowns in the name of proof. You wonder how many others floated, how many others did not. But history will not answer. It only murmurs beneath the water in a language shaped like bubbles and rot. When she is asked about the bark carvings found in her home, she tries to explain they are birds. Her only friends? But the magistrate holds one up and declares it a devil's mark, a creature with forked tongue and split wings. The crowd murmurs. Their decision is already made, stitched from scraps of fear and suspicion. You hear someone recite a prayer, but the words are hollow, stilted, clanging in the air like iron on bone. The priest looks away as they lower her into the water. Her eyes are wide, not with fear, but with confusion. As if she cannot understand why the faces she once smiled at now gaze at her like meat on the altar. As the river swallows her, there is a collective breath drawn in. It is not compassion. It is anticipation. The magistrate wears a chain of rusted iron across his chest, a symbol of judgment long since divorced from reason. Her thin body, light as a sparrow's, bobs gently on the surface. The crowd gasps, but no one steps forward. This, they have been told, is the sign. A witch floats, just as oil floats above holy water. That is their logic. That is their faith. The men nod to one another. The rope is pulled, and she is dragged to shore, coughing and limp, her hair matted to her face. But they do not let her rest. She is lifted, shivering, to a wooden platform where the questioning begins. How long have you consorted with spirits? What animals do you speak to in the woods? Who gave you the songs you sing? He declares that alleys shall undergo the ordeal of water, not as punishment, but as proof. A witch, they claim, will float because she has rejected the holy element. An innocent girl will sink and be retrieved if God wills it. But there is no mention of the stones tied to her waist, nor of the crowd's thirst for certainty. A crowd is gathered on the banks, not for baptism, nor to bless the harvest, but to see a girl bound and dropped into the murk. She is no older than 14. Her name is Alice, and her sin is strange weather. When the wheat rotted in the field, and the cow birthed a calf with no eyes, the village did not seek the Lord nor the priest. They looked at the child who sang to herself in the hedgerows and carved birds into bark with stones. You watch as her mother tries to speak for her, but her voice is cracked from weeping. The ritual is performed with grim care. Her dress is soaked in vinegar. Alice floats. She answers with silence and tears. That is not enough. There is no fire this time, not yet. The village lacks the wood, and the season is wet. The village does not speak of her afterward. The priest avoids the river path. The scriptorium is colder than the chapel, though the fire never dies. You are here in the year of famine and frost, within the thick, choking walls of St. Galbert's Abbey in Lorraine. Each name is a soul marked for observation, not yet condemned, but watched. He records the color of candles used at funerals, the type of wood burned for warmth, the number of moles on a widow's cheek. The younger monks begin collecting whispers like relics. She lights her fire counterclockwise. He whistles during storms. They name their goats after saints. There are no signed confessions, no torture records, no accusations beyond symbols and dreams. But Etienne invites him to stay in the abbey. Within 3 nights, the inquisitor begins his own journal, and it mirrors Etienne's. Together, they read aloud the names in the refectory, as though chanting a litany. The monks begin fasting for those under suspicion. Villagers stop coming to the abbey for mass, too afraid to be seen, too aware that presence is as dangerous as absence. Each report adds another name to the ledger. Each name drags with it a shadow. Etienne writes these names in the back of the ledger with red wax, whispering, God accepts his own judgment. You do not see remorse in him, only completion. The ledger now contains over 400 names. One is yours, though you've done nothing but walk alone and pray without moving your lips. You remember how he looked at you during confession, how his quill moved before you even spoke. One night, Etienne dreams of fireflies forming the word infernum above the marshes. When he dies, face down on the altar, mid-sentence, in a name that begins with ease. The monks seal the ledger in his casket. They bury it deep beneath the sacristy floor, beneath salt and lead. But the ground does not rest. Years later, when the abbey is abandoned and the roof collapses, villagers claim they hear scratching beneath the stone, not from rats, but from a pen trying to finish a name. When he wakes, he adds 6 names to the book, none of whom live near a marsh. The dreams are enough. His truth no longer needs proof. Each detail is a thread, and from these threads he weaves guilt. He speaks of a pattern, a hidden tapestry of heresy blooming beneath the surface of rural piety. It is not just witches he seeks. It is the rot he imagines hidden beneath every prayer that does not echo exactly. There are no crimes listed, only habits. She speaks to herself when alone. Sells milk without blessing it, weaves symbols into her baskets. One entry simply reads, "Smiled during the eclipse." These names, dozens at first, grow into hundreds. Villagers and nobility alike, all cataloged by a bishop who believes God no longer sees clearly and needs assistance. His priests do not question him. They are too grateful for their bread, too afraid of the silence that coils in the abbey halls when Etienne is displeased. The bishop, Etienne de Mirepoix, is a gaunt man with eyes like spent coals and fingers ink-stained from decades of transcription. They say he once studied astronomy before turning to theology, that he sought the stars before settling for sin. And now he writes only names. It's not in the book of life, nor in any canon recognized by Rome. But in a leather-bound tome, he keeps locked in a casket behind the altar. Its pages are yellowed and brittle, like skin left too long in smoke. Its ink is rusted iron and soot. He calls it his ledger of sin. Etienne's voice is quiet, reverent even, when he reads from it. You see him seated beneath the relic of St. Peregrine's foot, quill twitching like a sparrow in winter, as he listens to reports from frightened monks and midwives pressed into confession. The bishop's obsession infects the abbey. Eventually, the ledger is brought to the attention of a local inquisitor. At first, he is skeptical. Then the deaths begin. Quiet at first. A young man found hanged near the bakery, a woman dead from bleeding after biting her own tongue. In time, Rome sends a letter of concern, but Etienne burns it. The flames eat through Latin like moths through linen. In the town of Thun, nestled against the spine of the Alps, the snow never quite melts. Even in spring, the mountain wind tastes of old bones and forgotten blood. It is here, in a stone chamber beneath the town hall, that the inquisitor Heinrich von Blum lays out his tools. No rack, no flail, no fire. Not yet. Only a chair with arms worn smooth by fingernails, a bowl of vinegar, and a brass needle, long as a finger and cruelly dull at the tip. It is not a weapon. It is an answer. For Heinrich believes that every witch bears a mark, and every mark can be found. If one knows where to prod, you are in the chamber when the first woman is brought in, Margreta, a weaver's wife, accused of ruining the flower with a single glance. She is barefoot, her lips cracked, her wrists blue with rope's memory. She claims no knowledge of the devil, no pact, no Sabbaths. But Heinrich smiles, and his scribe dips quill to ink. It is a numb place where Satan kissed the flesh, branding it for command. And so, the needle is pressed into Margreta's skin, behind the knee, beneath the breast, in the cleft of her back. She flinches, bleeds, cries out. These are not signs of innocence, only delays in discovery. Finally, beneath the lobe of her left ear, the needle sinks deep and draws nothing. She does not scream. Her breath catches. Perhaps in confusion, perhaps exhaustion. Heinrich steps back. What? The scribe records it. That is enough. Confession, he says softly, comes not from words, but from the flesh. Orders are stripped and examined. The scribe, a boy of 17 with 2 wide eyes, marks her body on a crude drawing. Every freckle, every mole, every scar. Then the needle begins its slow, reverent journey. Heinrich's philosophy is simple. A witch's mark will not bleed nor feel pain. She is declared a witch. The town does not cheer. It never cheers. The people watch the trial with the same blank expression they wear to funerals. Still they come. Still they nod, because this is how order is kept. Not through truth, but through repetition. Margreta is held until the snow begins to fall again, then burned in the same square where her husband once sold wool. No one speaks her name after the ash cools, but 3 women come forward separately asking to have their children examined just in case. Heinrich obliges. He is tireless. Night after night, women are brought before him. Some cry, some spit, some pray. But one winter, when his own servant girl is brought before him for humming during a thunderstorm, something shifts. He examines her, finds the mark, declares her guilty. But her mother, a washerwoman with hands like roots, steps forward and says, "Then I have the same mark." She tears open her bodice, presses the needle to her own skin, and bleeds not at all. She smiles. All are eventually pierced. A few resist so fiercely that the guards break fingers restraining them. She had tried to cool him with water and herbs. Others whisper that the devil came to collect his due, but the needle remains. Nailed above the town gate, a warning, or perhaps a mirror. For in Thun, they no longer use needles, but the fear remains, sharp as brass and duller than understanding. Heinrich inspects the animal with the same brass needle, finds a patch of skin that doesn't flinch, and declares the goat possessed. It is slaughtered in the square. Children are forbidden to drink milk for a fortnight. You begin to realize that this is no longer about heresy or salvation. This is theater, a bloodless opera where fear sings louder than reason. The townspeople say she sang a lullaby in the wrong language. Her examination lasts hours. The scribe's hand cramps. Heinrich's breath wheezes through his teeth as he kneels over her, searching, always searching. When he finds a mole on her heel that does not sting when pierced, he leans close and whispers, "The devil leaves his footprints at the edge." Others go limp, as though their minds have drifted far away, where no needle can reach. Always the same outcome. A mark is found. A breast that does not hurt, a foot that does not bleed, a belly freckle that does not twitch. Pain becomes the currency of innocence, and numbness the signature of the damned. There is a girl, barely 10, who is brought in after her brother dies of fever. Later, after she has been taken to the abbey for instruction, a woman arrives with a goat she claims has been giving sour milk since Margarita died. Eventually, Heinrich's needle is said to have found more marks than any inquisitor in Thun's history. The room is silent. Heinrich never recovers. Days later, he disappears. Some say he fled to Rome. You are in Toledo now, where the air hangs heavy with orange dust and secrets. The city glows at dusk, like a candle melting slow, gold seeping into every crack of stone. For a coin, she'll burn rosemary and speak of unborn sons or unburied sins. Her cottage smells of smoke and thyme, her walls lined with bones that once belonged to animals too small to matter. There is only fire already laid. She is given one chance to confess, to name others, to repent. When it is over, they find only a shard of scorched bone and a sprig of thyme untouched by flame. They keep both wrapped in cloth. No one feeds them. No one offers shelter. The city forgets them as quickly as it judged their blood. By winter, Lucia can no longer walk. Her spine curls like a question mark. Mateo begins to speak to the dead. At first in whispers, then in clear, calm Spanish. People laugh, till the butcher's wife loses her baby, and Mateo is seen drawing circles in the dirt with his finger and muttering to the wind. She says only this: the devil fears a mother's curse more than holy fire. They gag her. The crowd is smaller than usual. Most have grown tired of flames, but few dare protest. The priest blesses the pyre. A child throws a stone, and then the flames are lit, wet wood popping like knuckles. Smoke rises, sweet and bitter. The smell of crushed sage, burnt skin, and centuries of silence. She sings songs older than Spanish, older than Rome, songs that make the hair on the nape rise like a frightened dog. Still, the people come to her, even the priest's niece, especially the priest's niece, who whispered about a hidden pregnancy and left with a charm stitched from lambskin and nettle. But in the slums beyond the cathedral, hunger moves quicker than flame, and fear grows in the shadows cast by the bells. It is here that 2 children, a boy of 7, a girl barely 6, sit barefoot in the alley behind the tannery, their stomachs groaning like old wood. Their names are Mateo and Lucia, and they have never known the warmth of a full plate, only the heat of accusation. Their grandmother, Inez, is called a bruja, She sells herbs, yes, but also dreams. But when Lucia falls ill with fever and stiff limbs, the whispers begin again. This time they do not stop. The neighbors say Inez's touch passed death to the child, that she called spirits into the girl's lungs, that she cursed the family she had raised. You see them when the constables arrive, faces wrapped in cloth, eyes unreadable. They drag Inez from her garden, stepping over crushed mint and marigold. The children scream. Mateo claws at one man's cloak, begging in broken sobs. Lucia cannot rise. Limbs are crooked like burned branches. She watches from her cot as the only hands that ever cradled her are bound in rope. Take Inez to the square. There is no trial. There is no judge. Mateo and Lucia watch from the alley, unseen. They take him next. He does not cry when they drag him through the streets. He holds the sprig of thyme tight in his fist, even as they tear it away. It grows back, always. And the children of Toledo, when they pass it at dusk, walk faster, clutching their crucifixes and breathing prayers into their sleeves. But some, the ones with empty bellies and fire behind their teeth, pause. They touch the bark. They listen. And they swear they hear singing. They say he spoke his grandmother's name in reverse, that the birds flew in circles above the pyre, that the smoke turned green. They say a child should not know the names of the dead unless he calls them. Lucia is left alone, curled like a leaf beneath frost. When she dies, weeks later, her eyes are open, and her hand is clutching a splinter of bone. Years pass, a tree grows in the square where Inez and her grandson burned. It smells faintly of rosemary. The priest orders it cut down 3 times. The forest is older than language. You feel it in your bones as you step beneath its boughs. Not trees, but sentinels, twisted by time and salt and shadow. This is the black forest of Suevia, where the moonlight does not fall, it slithers. Where the wind does not rustle, it whispers. And tonight, there are visitors. Not travelers, not pilgrims, but women in cloaks stitched from old veils and darker cloth, barefoot, silent. Their faces are veiled, though not in modesty, in secrecy. They come from hamlets and hills, some walking for days without food, clutching tokens of ash and egg and bone. They bind women in rope and chain, strike down the old, silence the young. One man drives his dagger into a gourd drum and calls it the heart of Satan. The fire is kicked apart. Screams echo through the trees like birds set aflame. Dorothea does not run. She cannot. They catch her singing to herself, a lullaby for a child who no longer breathes. They accuse her of summoning spirits with her voice. She shakes her head. But when they find the dried apple slice she carries, carved with a spiral, they proclaim it a relic of the devil. They are not witches. They are about to be remembered as such. The priest comes with questions already answered. Who led the Sabbath? The others, 13 in all, are tried, judged, and scattered across the region's jails. Most will never return. But the forest remains. Every year, even now, travelers report finding bone charms strung in branches, fire pits shaped like circles, strange fruit rotting at impossible times of year. The inquisitors return once more, decades later. They find only silence. But deep in the moss, scratched into stone, they uncover a single phrase in a language older than Latin. We danced once, and we will again. What did you sacrifice? What beast walked among you? Some women deny everything. Others, too afraid, nod to anything. They name herbs they cannot pronounce. They name stars. They name each other. A girl of 15 asks what she saw in the fire, says my mother's hands. They say that is proof. The bishop writes to Strasbourg, we have rooted out the Sabbath. The devil has fled to deeper woods. It is Walpurgisnacht, the eve of St. Walpurga, and somewhere along the way, the church's saint became tangled with the devil's bride. You hear the murmurs from distant villages. This is the witch's Sabbath. This is when they dance with the horned one. This is when goats bleed wine and shadows kiss the earth. The church calls it heresy, but still, the people come. Out of curiosity, out of defiance, out of hunger for something wilder than sermons and colder than pews. A fire crackles in a clearing. Music, crude pipes, drums, hollow gourds. Rises like smoke from mouths you cannot see. Among them walks Dorothea, a widow from a hillside orchard. She lost her 3rd child to fever and her tongue to grief. No spells, no blood, just hunger. But then the dancing begins. Slow at first, a circle turning clockwise. Feet stomp, skirts lift, voices rise. Some call it ecstasy. Others call it madness. Dorothea closes her eyes and remembers what it is to be warm. One woman strips to the waist, paints her belly with ash. Another pours wine from a clay vessel and lets it drip into the dirt. The drums beat faster. The moon peers through the clouds, a lidless eye. They say she mutters at dusk that apples from her tree taste like cloves and rust. She never admitted to anything, but the townspeople found strange symbols carved into the bark and declared them sigils. Tonight, she walks to forget. She walks to feel the soil under her feet without judgment. But she does not walk alone. Hidden behind trees, watching from horseback, are 3 inquisitors wrapped in oaths and fur. They were told the devil meets his daughters here, and they believe what they were told. The Sabbath begins not with blasphemy, but with bread. Loaves are broken and passed by hand. Dried berries are shared. It is when the soldiers charge. There is no warning, no judgment, no chance to explain. The inquisitors call it breaking the spell. Dozens are taken to the village jail. There's no room, so they are kept in the stables, shackled to the beams. Dorothea dies before the trial. Fever takes her in the night. They burn her body anyway, calling it purification. You arrive at the convent of St. Breda during Lent, when the air is thin with fasting and the candles burn low with doubt. It sits on a hill above the town of Bruges, surrounded by a garden of dead roses and thorny silence. Within its walls, women pray without voices, their mouths covered with linen after vespers, their steps measured like penance. But something is wrong. You can feel it in the stone. A pressure, like breath held too long. He arrives with a notebook of signs to watch for. Demonic trance, heretical speech, the stigmata of false holiness. Beneath the rose bushes, the nuns uncover bones, not human, not whole. The chapel is shuttered, and prayers are whispered, never sung. When pilgrims visit, they are not permitted inside. The gates remain locked at dusk. But some nights, the townspeople swear they hear voices rising from the hill. Not screams, not hymns, but something in between, as though someone or something is reciting names in a language that tastes of wax and wood smoke, arranged in a circle, too deliberate to be natural. He interrogates the cook, the gardener, the novices. None confess. They bless the halls, repaint the icons, bury the old garden beneath slabs of limestone. They say the sickness is gone. But when a nun named Magdalena begins to laugh during Mass and bleeds from the eyes without wound, the new abbess merely closes the chapel door. She writes a letter to Ghent, but does not send it. Instead, she buries it beneath her mattress. In her dreams, St. Breda has begun to speak, not with comfort, but with questions. And the stone walls of the convent do not echo anymore. They murmur. But one elderly nun, nearly blind, mutters that the voices came back when the moon went black. That is enough. The bishop is alerted. A public trial is avoided, but 3 sisters are sent away to separate convents. 2 more vanish before the transfer. They are never found. Father Matthias records the events in his journal, but the last entry is strange. It reads, "They are not possessed. They're listening." He interviews each sister. They speak in half phrases, flinch at bells, scratch at their skin, though there are no fleas. One presents him with a small bundle of wax, hair, and bone wrapped in cloth. Something she says she found beneath her pillow. She does not know what it is, only that it made her dream of drowning. They do not speak of it aloud, but they all feel it. The sigh in the chapel when no one is there, the chill in the bell tower. When the sun is at its peak, the scratching behind the statue of Saint Veronica, where no mouse dares nest. It begins with Sister Clemens. She collapses mid-prayer, her arms twitching, eyes wide and unseeing. The other sisters think it illness. Until she speaks in Latin she never learned. He waits behind the veil, she says, with teeth like pages and breath of iron. The abbess demands silence, demands prayer, demands salt at the door. But soon others follow. One by one, they fall into fits. Not weeping, not wailing, but laughing. Cold laughter, brittle as frost. Their hands contort into strange signs. One girl writes backwards on the wall, using her own hair dipped in ink. The word is not Latin. It is older, is not understood. The town priest is summoned, claims it is mass hysteria, brought on by fasting, by solitude, by envy. He recommends stronger discipline, longer prayers, less sleep. The abbess agrees, but the laughter does not stop. Nor do the visions. One sister claims to see men with goat feet whispering from the shadows of the refectory. Another says the crucifix in her cell bleeds rust. They are separated, isolated, denied even the comfort of touch. But the infection is not of body, it spreads through dreams. Soon, even the abbess wakes screaming, swearing that her tongue had been pulled from her mouth and replaced with one not hers. An inquisition is requested, quietly. The Bishop of Ghent sends Father Matthias, a man known for rooting out corruption among the cloistered. Father Matthias finds no proof, but his suspicion grows. He orders the garden torn up. Months later, the convent is quiet again. Too quiet. No new novices arrive. The abbess retires without explanation. The church replaces the convent's leadership. You enter a great hall veiled in velvet and arrogance. The court of Lady Isabeau, the Baroness of Arden, mistress of vineyards, patroness of string music and silent cruelty. The floor glimmers with imported tiles. Tapestries breathe with scenes of conquest and sanctity, but behind each woven saint stands a shadow. And tonight, the shadow is real. It crawls behind Isabeau's gaze, which burns bright even at 60, her skin powdered bone white and her lips as red as crushed poppies. Her wealth is untouched by war, her name spoken in salons with awe and fear. But no silk can shield what stirs in the heart of scandal. A raised mark, crescent-shaped, not quite natural. She says it came from childbirth. She says it came from war. But the court does not care. A bishop nods once. The mark is declared sufficient. No torture is administered. They say it is mercy, but truly, they fear her voice, her words, her gaze. She is sentenced to die at dawn by fire in her own orchard, where her vines drink deep and the soil remembers everything. A whisper. One name, one word. Tempostatrix. She hums. A song not Latin, not French. Rain falls only where it is needed. And once a year, on the night of the first frost, a one-eyed owl is seen perched upon the ruined spire of Arden, staring through windows no longer lit. Some say her spirit commands the weather still. Others say she never died at all, only changed shape, like wind through fire, or the truth behind power. The same melody she sang to her first husband as he died of fever. They tie her with silk cords. The firewood smells of lilac. She asks for no final words, but as the flames rise, the wind shifts. A sudden gust. The magistrate's robe catches fire, and the hem of a cardinal's cloak screams chaos. The pyre is extinguished. Too late, she is gone, but not ash. Only bones, perfectly clean, polished like marble, unburnt. They say she calls storms, that during the siege of Ardennes, she stood in her tower and raised her arms, and the rain fell so fierce, it drowned the enemy's torches. That lightning struck only the invading side, that her estate never floods, never burns, never fails to bloom. Nobles pack the gallery, dressed in mourning black, not for her, but for the game they know is ending. Witnesses are called. The groundskeeper speaks of herbs buried with dead toads. The cook weeps, claiming she was made to stir a soup clockwise against tradition. A dismissed maid says she saw Isabeau float 2 inches above the stone while praying. It is all absurd, and entirely enough. The inquisitor, a man with fingernails sharpened to points, reads from a book heavy as guilt. When he describes the devil's mark, a hush falls, as she speaks to her cats in Italian and weeps at full moons. The church pretends not to hear, for her coin silences more than heretics. But the whispers deepen when 3 maids fall sick in a week, when a page finds strange bones in the root cellar, when the Archbishop of Metz rides out after dinner and is found 2 hours later blind and babbling, speaking of a woman with silver teeth and no shadow. You are in her drawing room when they come. For men in cloaks, not soldiers, not clergy, something older, their eyes are flat as wet slate. Isabeau does not flinch. She pours wine, offers it with a smile, and asks if they've come to discuss myth or inheritance. They produce a scroll. Accusations. Whether working, consorting with spirits, maintaining a familiar in the form of a one-eyed owl. She laughs, a long, low sound that makes the fire crackle without wind. She says she will answer each charge in public. The people deserve to know what power truly looks like. The trial is a play, staged in her own hall. Isabeau, never one to beg, bares her left shoulder. There is a scar. At sunrise, you are there. She walks barefoot through her vineyard, past rows of fruit swollen with unseasonal ripeness. She does not weep. They bury the bones in lead. They salt the vineyard. They forbid music in her halls for 7 years, yet the land refuses to mourn. The grapes grow sweeter. You are in Innsbruck now, the air sharp as iron filings, the streets wet with slush and rumors. A manuscript is being copied in candlelit rooms, its ink thick with rust, and its corners flecked with ash. He believes it adds weight to the letters, a heaviness of judgment. Each sentence is a nail, each chapter a pyre. You read, all witchcraft comes from carnal lust, which in women is insatiable. He quotes from it with joy, like a poet in love with his own verses. The book says dreams are entry points. Her visions must be cleansed. She is locked in a cell where the only sound is the scratching of mice and the tearing of her own nails against stone. Her name is never spoken again. The church records her death as withdrawal from grace. To be skeptical of witches is itself heresy. And with that line, doubt is destroyed. If you question the trial, you are guilty. If you ask for mercy, you are a suspect. It is tradition. Passed from father to son, from abbess to clerk, its words etched into the marrow of law. And though its authors are long dead, Sprenger's bones scattered beneath a monastery wall, Kramer's heart seized mid-sermon, their ink still burns. Their sentences echo behind every scream of the falsely accused, every flame that rises not for warmth, but for spectacle. And the blood quill, black with names, is said to remain somewhere still, scratching in the dark, writing history with a hand no longer human. The flames rise not from the hearth, but from the parchment, and each execution becomes a sermon. The parchment drinks the hatred, and the hatred spreads. Priests quote it from memory. Magistrates sleep with it beneath their pillows. It becomes scripture where scripture falters. Wherever it is read, someone dies. A boy helping in the shop falls ill the same night. His mother swears she saw a crow perched on the press. They bind her wrists and tell her the devil favors printer's ink. The hammer has fallen. It does not matter who the nail is. Not with ceremony, not with question, but with certainty. Its title hums like a curse. Malleus Maleficarum, the hammer of witches. In Trento, a widow buries her cat after it falls from the roof. Her neighbors remember chapter 12. The devil enters through the beast. She is tied to a chair before sunset. In Lucerne, a man dreams of a woman with burning eyes and wakes with a fever. His wife is dragged from bed before he cools. The Malleus becomes the silent judge in every home. Not a book, but a breathless presence. A ghost of ink that smells like firewood and old paper cuts. You see it pass from hand to hand, from trembling scribe to monk, from bishop to judge, until it rests on the lap of a man who smiles too easily when he reads of fire. His name is Jakob Sprenger, and his eyes shine not with holiness, but with hunger. This is no book of protection. It is a weapon, and it does not wait. Sprenger's quill moves like a blade. He dips it in ink mixed with powdered ox blood. In the town of Lindau, a girl is seen picking mushrooms at dawn. The baker's wife finds this suspicious. The book agrees. You watch as entire parishes are reshaped by its logic. Confession becomes performance. Denial becomes proof. Women are searched for teats unseen by mortal eyes, for marks that do not bleed, for sigils in the shape of desire. A midwife is accused after a stillbirth, which is asked how many children she delivered. When she says 83, they say, too many. No woman can bring life without first knowing death. She is stripped, searched, pierced, find nothing, so they dig into her with words until she screams, and then they say the devil has fled. Sprenger himself begins to travel with the book. He arrives in small towns like a winter storm. Quietly, then with violence. In a convent near Zurich, a nun dreams of drowning. She confesses her fear, not her guilt, but fear is enough. You are in Basel when the printer completes the 50th copy. Each page is checked, each curse aligned. By the century's end, Malleus Maleficarum has become more than text. You find yourself in Strasbourg, the summer of 1518, where the sun bakes stone into silence and the streets reek of sweat and old broth. But something stranger than heat is stirring. It begins with a single woman. They prescribe more dancing. A platform is built. Musicians are hired. But the music only fuels the nightmare. Children are pulled from their beds by mothers who sway in their sleep. Men collapse foaming, their legs still twitching. Beneath it all, in the cracks of the paving stones, you swear you hear laughter. Not human, not kind. She screams the name of a girl she swore had cursed her milk. Then her tongue splits down the center, and she laughs until her throat bursts. A merchant's wife sways while cradling a bundle of cinders she claims as her child. The city healer draws diagrams in chalk on the convent floor, desperate to map the motion like a plague. But the lines spiral, twist, consume themselves, like a serpent biting its own tail. Her name is Frau Trophia, and she dances. Not with joy, not with music, but with fury. Her limbs jerking like marionette strings pulled by unseen hands. The records say hundreds were afflicted. Some died from exhaustion, others from strokes, heart failure, crushed lungs. No cause is ever found. No single spell, no venom. Only the motion, the compulsion, the grave deep grief. The church blames the devil. The physicians blame the spleen. But the children of Strasbourg know better. They say, the ground remembered. That the blood spilled in the name of fear had soaked too deep, fermented too long. She dances through the square, bloodied feet slapping cobblestones, arms flailing like a scarecrow in storm wind. They dance still, beneath the stones, in shoes they never wore, to music never composed. The grave does not rest when the living forget, sings and it waits. She dances until she collapses, only to rise again the next morning. And by week's end, a dozen more join her, then 50, then 100. No music, no command. Only rhythm, compulsive and cruel, wrung from the bones themselves. You watch as the priests panic. The physicians call it hot blood, a humoral storm that must be released through motion. The city calls for exorcism. A procession of barefoot priests marches through the market square, holding relics aloft like shields. They chant, but their voices are drowned by the pounding of feet. Dust rises, blood darkens the stones. Those who try to stop the dancers are struck down, not by fists, but by the sheer force of movement, as if the dancers are not dancing, but being dragged. They bite their own tongues. Their eyes roll white, sing songs that have not been heard since the last plague. Black goat, red sky, make the wheat dance dry. The bishop forbids music. Drums are outlawed. String instruments are broken in the square. The city silences itself, but the dancing continues. Man throws himself into the river, legs still kicking. A girl dances into the cathedral and collapses at the altar, whispering he wears the bones of the buried like bells. You begin to see the faces of the dead. Old witches burned a decade ago, their names now forgotten. Mirrored in the twisted expressions of the dancers. The rhythm has no mercy, it feeds on memory. A woman who once testified at a witch trial begins to dance. By the 4th week, the bishop declares it witchcraft, too late for reason. At night, when the street's still and the moon turns red behind the cathedral spire, you can still hear it. Faint, beneath the hush of the river and the creak of timbers, a phantom beat. Soft as breath, cruel as memory. In the valley of Ney-de-Lingen, cradled by crater walls and superstition, there lies a town that grows quieter each year. You arrive as the harvest is being pulled, though the fields yield little, the stalks brittle, the soil hard as old bread. The church bell rings with less conviction now. The baker speaks less. The children play only indoors. The mayor echoed him, and the people repeated the words like liturgy. But unease clung to their backs like soot. The fields began to wither. Grain sprouted, blighted. Milk soured overnight. Then, inexplicably, the worms. The soil dies in patches, black and silent. The cows deliver stillborn calves. The teacher flees. The priest fasts until he sees visions, claims Ilsa rides the wind with a crown of feathers and a beak for a face. That she speaks from chimneys and drips blood from rooftops. He orders the burning of all books with birds on their covers, even the children's psalters. The people walk with eyes cast upward, searching for wings that never return. Some say the crows were messengers of judgment, and that with their flight, the town was unmoored from mercy. Others say Ilsa was their queen, and that when she burned, they followed her into whatever dark waits beyond sky. The local apothecary is accused of necromancy for brewing tea with elder bark. They find a feather in her mattress. Not crow. Goose. Doesn't matter. She's drowned in the well. Pigeon skulls. Rabbit ribs. Anything. They hang shiny objects in trees. They chant. One elder reads from a text he swore never to open, and afterward the well runs black for 3 days. In desperation, they exhume Ilsa's ashes, but there are no bones, only soot. The priest collapses and dies that same night, his mouth filled with feathers, not his own. A child was born with teeth, and when winter came, the wolves stepped closer than they ever dared before. Something is missing. Not just joy, not just hope, but something more ancient. Woman cuts out her own tongue, claiming she heard Ilsa speak through the church bell. And then, one evening, when the sun melts into blood behind the hills, you see them, one by one, crows, a dozen, then more. Silent, perched on chimneys, steeples, crosses, watching. They do not caw, they do not blink. There are no crows. Not a single one. Not in the trees, not on the rooftops, not in the fields where they once cawed in great raucous flocks. The townspeople say it is a blessing, but you know better. Crows do not abandon the dead, they follow it. The absence began a year after the last witch burning. Her name was Ilsa, a spinster, a beekeeper, a reader of weather and wounds. They said she cursed a nobleman's wheat, turned his daughter's hair white, spoke Latin in her sleep. They wanted proof the crows had not fled, only moved. But the traps stayed empty. The forests echoed only with the creak of trees. One boy swore he saw a crow in the graveyard, perched on Ilsa's scorched headstone. The priest ordered the stone broken. The next morning, the boy was gone. His boots found near the old pyre, filled with ice, though the night had not frozen. They said she changed into a cat at night and stole milk from sleeping cows. You saw her burned. You remember the silence. No bird song, no wind. Just the pop of wet wood and the hiss of green pine. Afterward, the trees were empty. The crows, once thick as plague rats, vanished. The priest declared it divine, a sign of purification, that the birds had fled the devil's feast, or that heaven had swept them clean. In spring, the town elders ordered traps laid, not for witches this time, for birds. You watch the town unravel slowly. Each absence births another. The cats vanish. Then the sparrows. Fear makes people devour their own names. The midwife changes hers. And still no crows. The town begins to place bones on rooftops, hoping to call them back. You feel the town held in suspension, like breath before a scream. There are no more accusations, only waiting. By midsummer, the silence becomes unbearable. The mayor kills his dog for barking. The morning the town is gone. It is 1602, and the village of Igrigi clings to the Hungarian hills like moss on damp stone. The winters here are long, and the nights longer still. Hours stretch thin between frost and fear. She says she has delivered every child in the village, nursed the priest's own sister when the fever came. They spit at her feet. The priest looks away. See, the moment her mouth tightens, not in fear but in something older, contempt wrapped in exhaustion. They bind her wrists and lead her through the square. God. Where mothers avert their children's eyes and fathers pretend, they do not hear the cracking of her cane as it is torn from her grasp. When the smoke clears, the crowd waits for the ashes to cool. They rake through the cinders, expecting nothing but dust. The priest, pale as wax, orders them locked away in a lead box and buried beneath the altar. That night, the stone beneath the altar cracks in two. But there they are. Her bones, not gray, not crumbling. White and whole, glistening like polished ivory, untouched by flame. The village has no healer. The chapel lies cracked and empty. The altar remains shattered. But every year, on the day of S burning, the oldest tree in the village bleeds sap the color of rust. And in its roots bones emerge, one by one, white as snow, warm to the touch, never crumbling. That she was not witch but guardian. And now the village is exposed. He is laughed at, but no one walks the ridge afterward. At night, the wind howls through the empty barn, where once cured herbs. The dogs do not bark anymore. They simply hide. Milk spoils. 2 infants die within hours of birth. The baker's oven refuses to heat. The air stinks of sulfur, even in clear weather. They dig up the bones and scatter them across 3 fields. The next morning, all 3 are found barren, riddled with mushrooms and rot. The livestock refuse to graze there. Bees abandon their hives. The priest tries to explain it away, that the fire was insufficient, the wood impure. They try again. More oil, hotter blaze, still the bones remain. A 3rd time, using peat and pitch and even salt. You are here to witness the trial of a midwife, accused not of curses or storms, but of something quieter, survival. The charges are read: blasphemy, herbalism, unnatural aging, and silence. The townspeople gather, faces pressed behind scarves. The fire takes time to grow. Green wood, wet air, stands upon the stack, eyes fixed not on the crowd, but on the bell tower. You watch her lips move. No sound comes, but a crow lands on the rope that rings the bell, and the metal begins to sway. They mistake it for wind. You do not. Yes, silence. They claim her refusal to gossip, to weep, to plead, is itself an admission. She names no accomplices. She swears no pacts. She does not even call out to God. This is her final crime. A woman who burns alone is assumed to burn with someone else. The devil, perhaps, or worse, a truth. She is old, too old, they say, for someone who has buried 3 husbands and yet walks with a back unbowed. Her eyes are bright. Her skin, though lined, does not wither, and the rumors bloom fast in such dry soil that she drinks broth boiled from unbaptized bones, that she keeps her age locked in a jar buried beneath the hearth, that she will not die unless burned. When they come for her, she does not flee. She opens her door before the guards knock, a ladle in her hand, stew on the fire. She is tried in the chapel, not a courtroom. There are no legal forms here, only scripture and suspicion. On the first morning of frost, they build the pyre. It is high, ringed with branches of hawthorn and oak. Flames consume her clothes. Her skin blackens. Her hair ignites with a sharp hiss. She does not scream. The bones remain. They panic. A child cries. A woman faints. The smith claims the bones are cursed, that they will not rest unless ground and cast into the Danube. Whispers spread. That was not mortal, that she bore the mark of some pre-Christian god. A merchant passing through claims he saw a woman of ash-white skin and glowing eyes walking the ridge above Egregi, barefoot, humming to herself. Years later, when plague hits the valley, Egregi's left untouched. No one can explain why. They no longer try to burn them. In the Benedictine Abbey of Morimondo, there lies a room forbidden to novices and too quiet for monks. A stone chamber without windows, its only light from candles whose flames lean inward, as if pulled by some slow breath beneath the floor. Gerhardt claims it can see the taint of unclean spirits, that its surface shivers when guilt approaches, that witches cannot bear to look into it without revealing their crimes. He says it found 3 in Milan and 5 more in Alessandria. He says the mirror burns the face of the liar, not madly, softly, like someone remembering something too old to name. The monks say it is the devil surfacing. They drag her from the chamber. The next morning, her tongue is found nailed to the abbey gate, her body nowhere. One monk finds him at dawn, crouched before the mirror, whispering to it in a tongue not Latin, not German. When asked what he was saying, Gerhardt answers, "She knows my name. There is no woman in the room." Gerhardt claims she fled, taken by guilt. The novices start locking their own cells from the inside. Brother Lothar, a scribe with inked fingers and too much curiosity, insists the mirror be tested. Gerhardt withdraws from public ritual, his sermons now whispered through a veil. The monks find him one morning staring into the mirror's cloth-covered shape. Eyes bleeding at the corners, lips murmuring, "I saw her burn, and she still watches." He dies the next day. The abbey records it as a fever, proposes a trial, place a known innocent before it. And once, when the wind blew hard from the south, a crack appeared in the stone. From within it, something glittered. Not gold, not bone, but something polished, black, curved. It's like a shard of something that once reflected fire. The flame gutters, the surface ripples. Then heat, the candles explode, the stone cracks. Child faints. When she wakes, she does not speak for 3 days. When she finally does, she says only it sees itself. If the mirror reacts, then it is false, Gerhardt agrees. Too quickly. A child is chosen, 9 years old, never accused of anything, never seen alone, never wept during Mass. She is brought to the chamber. The mirror is uncovered. No one dares ask if he has tested it on himself. At its center stands a mirror, not of silver or glass, but obsidian, polished smooth as water held in a blackened bowl. You are there when Abbot Gerhardt lifts the velvet covering, his hands trembling despite his vow of composure. The monks avert their eyes. They believe the mirror does not reflect, but reveals. And what it reveals, they say, is the witch. The mirror came from somewhere south, perhaps Moorish lands, perhaps older. It was brought not for beauty, but for judgment. A priest who quotes scripture in reverse syllables. Each looks into the mirror, each reacts differently. One screams, one vomits, one turns to stone, not literally, but inwardly, as though something inside them freezes and never thaws. After each judgment, Gerhardt smiles a little more. He keeps the mirror in his private quarters now. He claims it dreams beside him, that it whispers warnings. You watch as a woman is brought in, Lena, a wine seller's widow, accused after her neighbor's vines withered and her own thrived. Her hands are stained purple from grapes. Her back is hunched from labor. Her eyes hold no secrets, only fatigue. Gerhardt orders her to kneel. He lifts the cloth. The mirror stares. Still. He tells her to look. At first, nothing. Then she gasps. Her breath fogs the air. Not the mirror. She begins to cry, then laugh. More are brought. A girl accused of tracing runes in flour. A blind man who sings at night. But you begin to see cracks, not in the mirror, but in Gerhardt. He twitches. He forgets prayers. He sweats even in cold stone halls. Eventually, someone dares to question. She does not flinch, but the mirror shudders. The mirror is locked away. Years pass, the chamber is sealed with wax and prayer. But on moonless nights, novices claim to hear breathing beneath the floor. No one touches it. It is 1697, and the fires have grown cold. You are in the village of Grofline, a place once soaked in accusation, where every whisper was a rope and every shadow a match. But now the gallows creak in the wind from disuse, and the witch-finders walk with rust on their boots. The people no longer scream when a cat crosses their threshold. They no longer flinch when a woman speaks alone to the wind. They speak the names of the witches aloud, no longer with fear, but with reverence. Not as monsters, but as women who knew too much, loved too hard, survived too long. As if the rituals had run dry, you sense it in the wind. No longer hot with hatred, but stale with boredom. Even the devil, it is said, has moved on. There are no more Sabbaths to attend, no confessions to collect, no pyres to warm his feet. And if you turn too quickly, you might see her. Not Annika, not Ilsa, not Dorothea, but her. The one they always hunted, never caught. The one who watches from behind your reflection. She does not speak. She does not smile. She only waits and watches and listens. He is not driven away. He is not defeated. He is simply uninterested. The mortals do his work now, not with flames, but with laws. Not with trials, but with silence. He need not whisper lies anymore. They believe whatever suits them. The devil, they say, is no longer needed. The old women no longer hide their herbs. The young girls carve sigils into tree trunks for protection, not secrecy. Children visit her for remedies. The magistrate dies of a stroke the same night she lights a candle for him. No one calls it witchcraft. No one calls it justice either. It simply happens. And that, more than anything, is the final spell. Men dream of wives who walk through fire and do not burn. They forgot what they were looking for. The rituals grew hollow. The words stopped meaning anything. The devil grew bored. The fire at last went out. Not because they are wiser, but because they are tired. The devil, they say, has grown bored. There is no trial today, though a woman named Annika sits in the magistrate's cell. Her crime? Refusing to confess to anything. The priest came, read the rites, pressed a rosary to her neck. She yawned. The midwife was summoned. She found no marks. The inquisitor's house is abandoned, its windows bricked, its garden overrun with ivy and thorns that spell no names. A boy paints stars on the wall with pig's blood and no one stops him. A woman sells charms openly in the market, not hidden in baskets, not wrapped in cloth, but hanging from strings like garlic. A charm for sleep, a charm for birth, a charm to keep dreams at bay. The priest walks past her stall each day and says nothing. He wears no cross now. Only a bruise, purple and green, shaped like a handprint on his throat. His own, they say. The magistrate shouted, read aloud from the Malleus, banged his fist on the old Inquisition bench. She fell asleep. They tried to scare her with fire, but the pyres have not been rebuilt since last year's storm knocked them flat. No one volunteered to stack them again. They asked her finally if she had consorted with Satan. She looked up and said, "If I had, do you think I'd still be here?" The guards laughed. That is when they realized no one is afraid anymore. You walk through the village and see the remnants of the old fear rotting like fruit. The church bell no longer rings every hour. At night, people gather still, not for trials, but for stories, old ones. And yet something lingers, not fear, not guilt, but the absence of both, as if cruelty had exhausted itself. Annika is released after a week. No trial, no fine. She returns to her hut on the edge of the forest, where the crows now nest freely again. Because the witch hunts have ended not with enlightenment nor mercy, but with indifference. They burn too much. They hang too many. But sometimes when the wind is just right and the moon is thin as a thread, you might hear footsteps behind you in the leaves. Because if they ever remember, if they ever thirst for fire again, she will be ready. And now, you sit in silence, still hearing echoes. Not from the past, but from something deeper. Beneath the history books, beneath the sermons, beneath the polite forgetting. The flames may be gone, the gallows rotted, the inquisitors dust. But memory is a soil too rich to go fallow. The witch hunts were never just about witches. They were about fear, given form, authority, without question. Silence pressed between the teeth of the living and the dead alike. And in that silence, the fires still smolder. So, you've walked the path of ashes, felt the brass needle press against unburning skin, smelled the rust in parchment and prayer. You've seen how reason turns to ritual, how suspicion turns to spectacle, how even a mirror can be taught to lie. The story is done. But the fear, the hunger, the rhythm of accusation, they are not. They simply wait for new names, new masks, new kinds of fire. Do you still think it ended? Tell me in the comments. Which of these haunted you most? Which story lingered after the candle went out? I want to hear from you, and if you're not afraid, if you're willing to walk deeper into history's shadows, subscribe to Dark Ages Chronicles and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. We'll open the Black Book of Agony and examine the most brutal medical practices in history. Now go, but don't blow out the candle just yet.